If you've been coming to this channel for more than, I don't know, a few months now, you'd probably have seen my takes on Ghost Yotei and Erika Ishii as the main protagonist, Atsu, and me not being a big fan of Sucker Punch Studios and Sony taking a beloved series of Ghosts of Tsushima into a direction that feels like it was forced to insert a girl boss. And I didn't want to do that. I felt like this was just following an agenda, pushing the game into some place that I didn't want to be a part of. I don't feel like I was alone on that. And I took a stand saying that this is not a game that I want to purchase. And many other people were saying very similar things online to that. Reese Elliott of Alinea Analytics has come forward with a tweet that strikes me as very filled with corpo jargon to push an agenda and try to prop up Sony as best as he can, to what I can only amount to thinking is trying to get in the good graces with the corpo buddies and the bigwigs and saying, yes, I'm on your side. We're good. Everything's happy. Here are the numbers we have at Alinea. And you know what? Perfectly fine to do that. No issues at all. Except for the numbers that he's putting forward and then saying that they're actually really good when they aren't, makes me feel like there's an agenda at play here, and I have to call it out. And of course, one of those games being Ghost of Yotei, that I've covered in great detail, and how I feel compared to its predecessor, Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei was a flop. As I look at a sequel to a huge roaring success of an IP to do better numbers, typically 1.5 times minimum sales, but usually be aiming for double the sales because you already have a main audience of people, and the sequel is to draw in new people. And my contention from day one with this was, it's not a game that I particularly have any interest in. I fell in love with the story of the ghost, Jin Sakai, and what he could potentially be doing in the future and going to the mainland and becoming the ghost and going so many different directions they could have taken the story. But instead, Sucker Punch Studios decided to push this game into a girl boss direction, which allegedly Sony was not happy about when they were surprised when it got unveiled, if you want to believe that. But regardless of that, we're going to go through this tweet from Reese Elliott, and I want to cover additional things as well because I found this fascinating. We'll start with, here's how PlayStation Studio games from the past year have sold on PS5. Alinea Analytics estimates. And before I even go further, there is a lot of conversation online about Alinea's numbers and accuracy. We have people that want this to be right saying, yes, they're trustworthy. Meanwhile, everyone else that looks at it for what it is like, well, let's take it with a grain of salt because they have been way off before on other games. And this is kind of just throwing a dart at a dartboard and hoping to hit a target. Anyways, with that in mind, Ghost of Yotei has been a resounding success for Sony. Oh, wow. Okay. It must be selling way better than Ghost of Tsushima then, right? If it's a resounding success as a sequel, right? Since launching exclusively on PS5 back in October, it's amassed 4.8 copies sold, which, you know what? Honestly, for a random IP first-party title, that is an incredible number typically. Like across the board, if you can sell 4.8 million copies of a game, most of the time, you're going to be pretty happy with that, especially with the budget that Ghost of Yotei had, which was estimated to be somewhere between $60 and $80 million, all in with marketing, which is not very much relative to what other games cost these days, upwards of $200 to $300 to $400 million. So yeah, typically, you'd be really happy with that. Generated almost $350 million in revenue and is still selling. Wow. That's incredible. Again, you'd think this would be amazing, except for my contention from day one with this of, and we'll never know, this is the problem, what would have been with a Ghost of Tsushima 2 starring Jin Sakai again, going to the mainland and continuing the story and becoming the ghost? How many more people would have desired to play the game at that point? How much more popular could it have possibly been? My contention is way more than what this is. And oh, by the way, I said, what the fuck is this corporate spin on Yotei? This, quote, resounding success still hasn't cracked 5 million sales. Tsushima cleared that bar in 4 months. This has been out for more than double that amount of time and still hasn't even gotten there. This is a sequel to one of the most successful new IP that Sony has put out in recent memory, and relative to its predecessor, it has absolutely flopped. And it has. The reason why you make a sequel to a game is not to do worse than the original. It's to sell more copies than the original. So in that light, yes, it is a flop. You can't tell me that Sony was happy with these numbers. Put down the Kool-Aid, because you might be in a cult. Back to what Reeves was saying. For the past fortnight, let's reclaim that word, Yotei has had its first PlayStation Store discount down 29% to $49.69. And we've seen a clear bump since. In those 2 weeks, Yotei shifted an extra 250,000 copies. Players are sinking their teeth in, too. Average playtime overall is 47.7 hours, median of 45.5, and around 7% of players have logged more than 100 hours. Fair play, which is not that surprising considering the hardcore Sony fanboys that I would expect this would be somewhere between 5 and 7%. It don't shock me at all. But as far as the overall image that he shows here, PlayStation Studios games from the past year, PS5 copies sold for the following PS Studio titles: Ghost Yotei, far and away outpacing everything else that Sony has been selling, and it's not good. This number is atrocious. And you say 4.8 million is a lot, Smash. Why are you so hating on this? Guys, let's just take a quick look at PS4 games best selling for overall for Sony. Obviously, Grand Theft Auto 5 with the nearly 25 million copies sold. But then Marvel's Spider-Man, 22.68, almost 23 million copies sold. God of War, over 21 million copies sold. Horizon Zero Dawn, over 19 million sold. Uncharted 4, over 18, almost 19 million copies sold. So when Reeves is saying that this is a resounding success, I want to argue relative to what? What's he comparing this to? I mean, I guess it's a resounding success compared to Saros or Marathon, but compared to titles from Sony from yesteryear, this is doing absolutely atrocious. Like, I even showcased the Ghost of Tsushima has topped 5 million sales in under 4 months. Yet Reeves is saying that this 4.8 million in over 8 months is a resounding success. Please, someone make it make sense. Maybe Colin Moriarty can make some sense out of this. A lot of people doubt Alinea data. Reasonable enough, secret methodology, etc. But I will say this. I randomly asked Reeves to tell me about how many copies Saint Slayer sold, and he was off by only 6%. And it's far, far easier to gauge sales figures for larger games. Just an anecdote. So I think Colin is trying to look at this as a win for Yotei without saying that. But again, what's he comparing it to if that's what he's trying to do right now? Kurt Burns says, these are estimates from Alinea Analytics, who has been exposed for how off they can be in the past. And oh, by the way, Tycho Dragon Fan Club, they are using an estimate for Alinea Analytics, which has conflated numbers in the past and has a track record of being hugely inaccurate. And look who's in their little club. Featured by IGN, Giant Bomb, VentureBeat, Eurogamer. Think what you will, but my experience with many of these outlets are people in the industry with an agenda to push. And they're not a big fan of somebody speaking the truth. But yeah, that's Alinea Analytics saying that Ghost of Yotei is a roaring success, guys. Even though, Pirate Nation, Ghost of Yotei multiplayer mode will not get any more updates just 3 months after launch. Sucker Punch says that the Legends team play mode in Ghost of Yotei will not get any more big updates. The free multiplayer mode launched on March 10th, 2026, and the April raid update is the last big one planned after only about 2 months of major support. The servers will stay open forever, in quotes, so you can keep playing. They may fix small issues or add tiny events later, but no big new content is coming. This is much shorter than Legends mode in Ghost of Tsushima, which got updates for many years. But apparently, this resounding success of Ghost of Yotei is doing so good that Sony and Sucker Punch decided to stop making new updates to the multiplayer mode after only about 2 months. Do with that information what you will. And we'll leave it at this. The Alinea Insight newsletter. How are recent PlayStation Studios games selling? It's curious to see the verbiage that gets used here and the club that Alinea Analytics is finding itself in right now. Ghost of Yotei, Sucker Punch's open world samurai sequel, launched the 2nd of October, 2025. Spoilers, it's selling very well. Just the pace is about half of what its predecessor was, but apparently very well. I mean, if you're going to compare it again to Marathon, then yes, I would agree. Ghost of Yotei is selling very well compared to Marathon. But if you're going to compare it to apples with Tsushima, it's selling atrociously. And there's no other way to cut it. This, when you read this kind of verbiage, in light of knowing the context, you got to start asking questions of why are they talking like this about the game that isn't doing well? It's very strange. Yotei has sold more copies on PS5 alone than Assassin's Creed Shadows has across PS5 and Steam combined. What is this comparison? Assassin's Creed Shadows did not sell well compared to other Assassin's Creed games. Why are you continuing to compare apples to oranges as opposed to apples to apples? You can literally make anything sound like whatever you want it to when you start cherry picking the games to put in there and say, well, it's doing better than this game that I just randomly picked that is doing terrible compared to games in its series that came before. But don't worry about asking questions about any of that. Just consume product and say Ghost of Yotei is amazing. Look at this. Ghost of Yotei is currently outpacing sales of Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I guess they're both samurai games, but why wouldn't you contrast this with Ghost of Tsushima unless you know it's not doing as well as Ghost of Tsushima? This makes the entire argument not just fall apart, but forever will make me question this Reese Elliott guy and the information and data that he's pushing, because clearly he has an agenda. But hey, maybe that's just me. That's the current situation with, in my humble opinion, the flop that is Ghost of Yotei compared to Ghost of Tsushima, which really, when it comes to a sequel, is all you should be comparing it to. I'll leave that there.